We're just about 5 months away from midterm elections, but some people are already talking about 2020. One of those people is Democratic Congressman John Delaney of Maryland. He announced his candidacy for commander-in-chief last July. He sat down with my colleague Reena Ninan to discuss his new book and talk about why he's running for president.
Your book here is called The Right Answer: How We Can Unify Our Divided Nation. Why do you think you're the right answer for the Democratic Party?
Because I actually want to unify our divided nation. To some extent, I'm answering that question with the title of my book. I think the central issue facing the country is the fact that we're so divided. And the reason it's a problem is because it's prevented us from doing anything. And we've watched several decades as the world has changed, and we haven't kind of updated the basic institutions in society for this change. And as a result, a huge number of people have been left behind in this country. And it's going to happen again with the pace of technological innovation. And we're not addressing this, right? And the reason we're not addressing this is because we're so partisan. And too many people in politics put their political party or this notion of kind of partisanship and party victories ahead of the country in the best interest of our citizens. And that's what I think is the most important thing in this country right now. And I'm someone who actually believes that's a problem. I'm someone who, as someone who's running for president, promises not to divide anyone. I don't act like half the country's entirely wrong about everything they believe. I was ranked the third most bipartisan member of Congress. I've had this kind of unique background where I grew up in a blue-collar family. You know, my parents didn't go to college. I was a successful entrepreneur. I was the youngest CEO in the history of the New York Stock Exchange. I ran for Congress. I've been in the Congress now 6 years. I was ranked the third most bipartisan member of the Congress. So I've got all these kind of different experiences in my life that have made me very focused on this notion that you have to work together with people to get things done.
You announced your candidacy last July.
That's right.
30 months before Iowa and New Hampshire.
That's right.
Why'd you do it so early?
I had to. Right, because I think I'm the right person for the job and I have the right vision, but not enough people know who I am. So there's two ways of solving that problem. Doing outrageous things that gets me lots of attention, right? And most of those things would be things I don't believe in or agree with, or get out really early and do the hard work. The best analogy for my campaign in many ways is Jimmy Carter's campaign in 1976.
How so?
Well, it started in 1974. So President Carter announced 2 years before the election, which in the 70s is like announcing on Inauguration Day, right? Because the election cycles were much shorter back then. So he announced 2 years early. He did 32 trips to Iowa. He was completely unknown. In fact, the New York Times wrote an article in 1974 about the 35 people likely to get the Democratic nomination. And Jimmy Carter, the sitting governor of Georgia, who had expressed an interest in running for president, was not on the list of 35 people. But he got in early, and he answered the central question of the day, which back then was, how do you restore trust in a corrupt government? Because we had just had Richard Nixon and Watergate, and the American people thought their government was corrupt. And the peanut farmer from Georgia, whose famous kind of campaign line was, "I will never lie to you," answered that question. I think the question the American people are asking now is, how do we bring this terribly divided nation back together after having the most divisive human being we could possibly pick as our president?
It's so interesting how you mentioned Jimmy Carter in that story, which I don't think most people knew.
Right.
I didn't
know until I actually started running.
You didn't know?
Well, I knew a lot about Jimmy Carter, but when I went to Iowa, people said, your campaign's a lot like his. Again, I knew about the Carter presidency, but I hadn't actually focused too much on his campaign. I was 10 years old at the time, you know? And so I went and I bought a bunch of books on the Carter campaign because people in Iowa were telling me this. Folks who've been around for a long time in the Democratic Party. And I read about the campaign, and I said, you know, there actually are a lot of similarities.
You know, when they told me to do this interview and they said you were running, I'm like, who?
Who? Right.
John Delaney? Congressman John Delaney? Who is he?
Right.
How do you compete with other people like Senator Warren or a Joe Biden, who has, as you have even admitted, far more name recognition?
Right. So it's the Iowa and New Hampshire strategy. So the reason Iowa and New Hampshire go so early, Iowa's the first caucus state, New Hampshire the first primary state, is their job in the presidential elections is to find people that other people don't know about. If that wasn't their job, there'd be no reason for them actually to go so early, if you think about it. And they pride themselves at doing this, right? They're very sophisticated voters. Every 4 years, they get the best education on politics and policy anyone could possibly get.
It's true.
Because these campaigns come there and they spend, you know, $1 billion kind of advertising and talking to these people. And right now, I mean, I've done 19 trips to Iowa and New Hampshire since I announced. I've done 180 events on the ground in those two states. I've been on television in Iowa since February. Right now in Iowa, if you take a look at the 15 people who most people think are going to run for president, I have the 5th highest name ID of that group of 15 people. Now, Joe Biden has higher. Bernie Sanders has higher.
Understandably, yeah.
Right. And 2 others have higher.
Yeah.
But I'm 5th out of 15. Now, when I started, I was right at the bottom of that list. So it kind
those trips are working.
Right, because it doesn't really matter to me in my strategy how many people around the country know me at this point. What matters is how many people in Iowa and New Hampshire know me.
What's the message in Iowa and New Hampshire that you feel is resonating with those voters?
That the Democratic Party should be the party that wants to bring the country together.
Do they buy that?
They do.
Why?
Well, I think in Iowa, they've seen firsthand what's happened to the Democratic Party. I mean, the Democratic Party in Iowa has suffered a lot of losses. Obama won Iowa by 10 points in 2008. President Trump won it by 9 points 8 years later. In 2008, they had a Democratic governor. They controlled the state legislature, the Democrats. They had 1 U.S. senator who was a Democrat, and 3 of their 4 House members were Democrats. Today, Republican governor, Republican state house, all the senators are Republican. So the Democratic Party in Iowa has kind of been, in many ways, wiped out across the last 8 years. So they know the party has a problem with its message, maybe with its messengers, and they're looking for something new. And what I'm explaining to them, and they get, I mean, these are kind of careful people, they're smart people, they have good kind of Midwestern values, and they understand that what we should be doing is working together to get things done. And what I say to them is it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the right political strategy, because it's what most Americans are looking for.
Your seat in Maryland in the 6th district is open in this year's midterms. Some folks in the Democratic Party have sort of are divided. Do you use impeachment against a president as an issue to try and get more Democratic votes, or do you stay away? Where do you stand on that?
So I think impeachment should only be used when you have bipartisan support to impeach a president. Right? Impeachment is a political process at its core. Right? You impeach in the House with a simple majority, and then you have to convict in the Senate with 2/3 of the Senate. So it has to be done on a bipartisan basis. And I believe the founders envisioned impeachment as a way to remove a president who was lawless or had done something that was against the values of the country or had abdicated their responsibility, when a majority of the country believe that should be the case. Right now, there's no Republicans in Congress who think President Trump should be impeached. So therefore, it does not make sense for the Democrats to actually be pushing for something that will just divide the country before we have bipartisan support. We also have an investigation going on, as we all know. And many of us believe, including myself, that the results of those investigations will be very revealing. And
do you think it'll come before midterms?
No idea. I mean, the one thing Bob Mueller's really good at is not having leaks, right? If you think about anything about his investigation, right, we don't know anything about it, right? We learn about things like right before he's supposed to do something, right, where he indicts someone or something like that. He doesn't leak, so no one knows. He's doing his job.
I want to ask you about former Maryland Governor Martin OMalley, another Marylander who ran and dropped out after the Iowa caucuses. Is there anything that you've learned from his campaign?
Well, Governor OMalley got in really late. So he got in after Secretary Clinton had entered the race, after Senator Sanders had entered the race. So I think, based on what was going on in 2016, by the time he got in, so many voters had kind of already settled into the camps of Secretary Clinton and or Senator Sanders, that there was really no room for him there. So I think that was one problem. I'm obviously not having that problem. I've gotten in really early. I think Governor OMalley also tried to run in kind of the senator as a candidate like Senator Sanders, where for a lot of his career he had been kind of a somewhat centrist mayor and governor. And so I think, you know, my view is I'm going to run based on who I am, you know, consistent with the way I've been historically.
Congressman John Delaney, best of luck to you.
Thank you.